Star Trek, the ultimate franchise. These are the voyages of 3 veteran Trekkies, Rich, Ian, and Toby. Their ongoing mission? To explore the vast Star Trek universe, to seek out new perspectives and fresh debates, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. Beyond the Final Frontier.
Welcome to episode 2 of Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast. I'm Rich Matthews, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Mr. Ian Spelling.
Hey guys.
And Mr. Toby Weidmann.
Hello.
We're going to go back to the beginning, in inverted commas, to rank the pilot episodes of all the Star Trek series. Now, that means, depending on your criteria, there's 12 episodes of Star Trek to rank. There's going to be more things to debate here because this is, rather than our first episode, which was pulling from all of Star Trek, this is a very specific set of episodes which we're going to debate and show our allegiances, I think, interestingly, because I think with the Star Trek series, it isn't just which ones you love. There are all sorts of reasons why you might rank certain beginnings. And for me, it was an interesting exercise in retrospect, how things might have changed, and definitely changed for me from when I was younger, when I first saw all of these. So without further ado, shall we stick to the order? Shall I kick off again, gentlemen? Everyone happy with that?
Sure.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so, and this comes with, if anyone listened to the first episode, I alluded to a dark Star Trek secret. This is it. My number 12 is Beyond the Farthest Star, the animated series pilot, because I've not watched a single episode of the animated series. I wish I could send you a screen grab of Ian's face at that revelation, especially because the animated series came so high in regard from him last episode, so I can't really give an opinion on it. And this goes to it gets us to introduce, though, a new function for the podcast, which is I now have an away mission. In between episodes, my job now, my away mission, is to watch Star Trek the Animated Series to fill a gap in my Star Trek knowledge and my Star Trek experience. It is something I've always intended to do, but it sort of got away from me a little bit. And because, as we talked last week, I don't quite have the same deep love of the original series like me esteemed colleagues, I never really got round to it. So there you go. It's number 12 for me by default, ashamed as I am of that.
If it helps, it's in my 12th spot, but I have seen it.
Okay. Well, Toby, that's a good start then. So, what, Toby?
It's okay. The things that are good about it is that it's got, pretty much all the original cast doing the voices, I think, apart from Walter Koenig. I'm not quite sure why he decided not to take part, but there is a replacement, Lieutenant Arex, in the navigation role, who is a weird alien species, which I believe has been brought back in one of the more modern series, but I don't know a huge amount about it. The big problems is the animation style. It's that sort of 70s repeating the
filmation, isn't
the
it?
Same sort of scenes and
Tarzan
and
and Flash Gordon, isn't it?
Yeah,
animation.
It's not great. And in terms of the Star Trek animated series, it is the worst animation. I think it's hampered by that. The story is okay. It's a fairly simplistic plot, but that's because the running times are a lot shorter, and so they're just trying to get the story.
That's what's even worse. I've never watched it, Tony. Yeah. Let's be honest. It's not like it's a big time commitment.
But an interesting fact: it was written by Samuel Peoples, who also wrote Where No Man Has Gone Before. I don't think he wrote a huge amount more. He was sort of more into doing westerns than he was science fiction. But he was a friend of Roddenberry's, I think.
Mr. Spelling.
My number 12 has to be Discovery.
Ooh.
I've got to go with the Vulcan Hello Battle of the Binary Stars combo. I didn't think it did a great job of launching the show. Even from the trailer, they made the Starfleet logo in the sand. What are we doing? Seriously? A helicopter would blow all the sand. What's a fucking spaceship gonna do? I mean, come on.
Yes.
Is it a great image? Yes. It is very cool to look at. It had to have cost $20-something million for that pilot, if not more. All right, so it is filmic. There's absolutely no question. But if you said to me which is the best and which is the weakest, Vulcan Hello has to be the weakest for me.
Interesting. Yes, that will come up soon.
I was going to say, I think we're going to discuss this a lot more in a minute.
Yeah. Interestingly, yes, my number 11 is from a series that I grew to love, and in fact, of a lot of the modern Trek, it's one of my favourites. But I almost didn't get past the pilot, which is why it's my number 11, which is Prodigy. Lost and Found is the episode. Because while ultimately I found the show to really nicely embody Roddenberry's vision and the hope and aspiration that Star Trek and Starfleet should represent, I found the pilot to be essentially a Star Wars kind of knockoff and a bit too light, and some of the characters a bit annoying. It was only my devotion to the franchise that meant I stuck to it, even though it was designed to be a kid show. And ultimately, once we got about 3 or 4 episodes in, it started to become something a lot better, a lot more. It's never going to be one of my top shows, but the dynamic of this disparate crew coming together and how the Starship and Starfleet, therefore Starfleet and the Federation, the ideal represents how to bring them together and to be better, and to diversity, as we've already said, diversity and infinite variations. It suddenly felt in contrast to a lot of the other Star Trek shows that have been running, which were much darker at the time. But it's a show worth sticking with.
I rank it a lot higher. I only watched it recently. I haven't seen any of the rest of the series. I've only seen the pilot, and I watched it specifically for this episode. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and I thought it was great because I was thinking, if I was a kid and I was watching this, I'd love it. I'd be really into it. A lot happens. I like the characters. I like the discovery of the ship. I like the villain. That was a really good setup for the villain. You know, it doesn't answer all the questions, and you know, the reveal of Janeway at the end was something that I sort of was quite surprised by. I want to actually watch more of it.
Interesting.
So it had the opposite effect for me. I was more interested in seeing, having not really had any interest because knowing it was a kid show.
And in which case, it gets better and better, in my opinion.
I will be honest and say I am with Toby on that. I only saw the pilot, and I did see it for premiere. I actually saw the pilot and the second episode that we were sent in advance of doing interviews for the show. Other than the original animated series, I'm not an animation guy since, you know, my kids grew out of cartoons. So you're looking at 20 plus years at this point. So that will be my homework.
Your away mission.
My away mission will be doing, you know, if we're going to talk in detail about Prodigy and Lower Decks. I did watch a little more of Lower Decks. I thought the Prodigy pilot was effective for what it was trying to do. And yes, I completely agree that as a kid's show, it's a great entry point for kids to get into Star Trek. They had fun creatures, cool animation, it was zippy. And then for the moms, dads, and grandpas and grandmas watching the show with the kids or grandkids, there's enough Star Trek in there for it to be a Star Trek show and then an animated show.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a good refinement, which is to say I had no interest in watching a kids animation show, let's put it that way, and then it becomes more Star Trek.
But just for the record, that's my number 10.
Okay.
My number 11 is Beyond the Father's Star. It wasn't so much a pilot as a first episode, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
Whereas I will say that Prodigy started the story of Prodigy, whereas Beyond the Father's Star was honestly just another Star Trek episode.
With Prodigy, I mean, you have to admire the animation. I think the animation is
beautiful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And the Star Trek thing is that when I was watching the first episode, I was thinking there's no Star Trek in this whatsoever, and until kind of like right at the end. And then the second half of it, the second episode, is where, you know, you find more and more about the kind of connection and connecting to the Star Trek world, which I quite liked. I thought that was kind of refreshing that it wasn't Star Trek related until it was.
But you may have hit the nail on the head for maybe why, because I do watch more animation, and it's that animation style, well, good, I've seen before.
Oh, really?
I think, yeah, which is why that's probably what it was. So like I was watching this going, well, this is like a lot of other CGI Korean sort of high speed, a bit of Love, Death and Robots in it, if you see what I mean, Tobes, you know, that sort of...
Absolutely.
And yeah, so yeah, as I said, so in a way it's a good thing. It's just for me, as I said, it almost lost me, and I'm glad I pushed through.
My number 11 spot is the Vulcan Hello. I absolutely hated it.
No, but Toby, what do you really think?
So the animated series is only below it because I just think it's sort of a bit of a nothing forget episode. At least I remember this episode, and remembering I hated it. There's just nothing I really like. I didn't like the setup. I don't like the look of the ship. I didn't like the new look Klingons. I didn't like Michael Burnham being Spock's sister. The only thing I can say about the production values are just you can see where the money was spent, and I like Doug Jones's performance as Saru, but
Doug Jones is good in anything he's in.
Yeah, everything else I don't know. I just think it's a disaster, and we'll probably go into this later. But I gave up on Discovery at the end of season 2 because it was just making me angry rather than intriguing me. So. Maybe that's my homework. I really wish it wasn't, because I just don't want to go back to it.
Your away mission is a dark one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because my number 10 isn't the Vulcan Hello. It's my number 9. But my number 10 is Remembrance, which is the pilot for Picard. At least Discovery felt like it was trying to do something. I'm not saying it worked necessarily, but Picard, because it's working with a character in a universe at a point in time that and have expectations for, I really didn't enjoy it. For a lot of the reasons, actually, which we discussed last episode, which is it's too dark. The modern predilection for traumatized heroes was projected onto Picard, which sort of goes against one of the key tenets of Star Trek, which is competent people doing competent things competently and doing their duty. It's a bit like James Bond in the Daniel Craig era, where suddenly it was all connected. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes Bond is doing a mission for on a major secret service, nothing else. And sometimes Star Trek crews are just doing their job. And some of the greatest moments in Star Trek are just that, going where no man has gone before, where no one has gone before. And this seemed to go back on that. I hated what they did with the Romulan scenario, how they basically turned a fairly stable utopian ideal of the Federation into something very flawed and very modern American, in terms of the sort of how the experiment isn't really working anymore. And in a way that Deep Space Nine had similar ambitions, but did them so much more eloquently, without destroying the inherent goodness and light that Star Trek represents. I didn't like all the retrofitting of the TNG stuff. I didn't like the focus on Data and Picard, but there were good ideas, and I'm probably more judgmental when good ideas are wasted than I am any other time, and I felt like the initial season of Picard, and the pilot in particular, was a wasted opportunity, which again I think mirrors something Ian said about the series as a whole. And it took until season 3 to suddenly go, oh, okay, well, this is what it should have been all along. There we go. That's my number 10. Ian?
Well, for my number 10, I'm going with Lost and Found, Prodigy. I liked it. I didn't love it. Nothing wrong with it. It's just I'm not an animation guy. And I will be completely honest, I was deep into Star Trek journalism still at that point, and I wasn't assigned to cover it very much after the pilot.
That's interesting, though. That's important to note sometimes that can impact it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, as much as I love Star Trek, we all have other things going on. Also, this was at the cusp of there being a lot of Star Trek at once. And so you have to pick and choose your shot. It is no actual reflection on the quality of the episode, but it's just in terms of my list, and then Lower Decks honestly wouldn't be far behind that.
That is an interesting point, because it is funny, isn't it, that because I've been writing an academic paper for the 25th anniversary of Enterprise. Do you remember how much everyone was banging on about franchise fatigue?
Yeah.
And it's like, was nothing compared to what happened, like, if you go back a couple of years, there was so much Star Trek. And it was like, okay, and then Strange New World sort of had to float to the top rather than it being an event. Whereas all we really had before was maybe a couple of seasons overlap between two shows.
Right.
So it's interesting that that's what was considered to have killed Enterprise and Star Trek at that point. And yet now, in the media soup we live in, you just keep throwing stuff out. So I can completely see why Prodigy would be like, well, okay. Yeah.
Weirdly, because the modern shows I feel have been targeted at different audiences. but maybe that's, saturated who's watching what,
Yeah, you divide the audience rather than grow it, I think, is the thing. Whereas, Ian, you said it very nicely last episode, where if you're in the right place, Star Trek plays for kids and for adults and for grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
And if you deliberately split out those audiences into different series, it's harder to represent the whole, isn't it? Okay, so Toby, you're number 10.
Right. I think this is going to be a shocking one.
Ooh.
It's Encounter at Farpoint. Next Generation. I think it's a really bad pilot. Well, premiere. It's really boring. I don't think any of the characters introduced well. I have one single highlight, and that's the appearance of DeForest Kelley right at the very beginning in his conversation with Brent Spiner. That's the only bit. Even Q is not an interesting. It gets better.
He does get better. I'd agree with that. From Q Who on, he gets better.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't like this episode. I've watched it maybe twice. I just don't want to go back to it.
I totally respect that. I've got Encounter at Farpoint at number 7, to be honest. But it was, as we all know, 2 episodes crammed together separately when the network or the distributor of the syndicated show said, hey, we want this to be a 2-hour pilot. So, half of that episode was Frankenstein, and the 2 halves do not equal the whole. So it doesn't quite work. There's a lot of introduction in there that is a little slow to watch, if we're being honest. There are things in several of the characters that were either dropped or embellished in different ways. Subsequently, you get that with any pilot, but I will say that there are other Star Trek pilots that better establish the characters from the get-go.
I agree.
And build on the characters that we met in that respective pilot versus the Next Generation. Specifically, Worf.
He's just there, isn't he, really?
Right?
I've actually got it at number 5 on mine.
Wow, that's high.
Well, because I was very excited and yet equally worried about it. I remember, so what would it be? It was 87, wasn't it? So I was 11, and I had to go out and rent it because it wasn't broadcast until like 1989, I think it was, wasn't it? It was like 2 years behind. So,
but it was on the BBC, right?
BBC 2, yeah.
And then it got bought by Sky, and then you couldn't watch it anyway.
And there are things in it I do really like. I think Data, Picard, and Geordie, I remember thinking they were all great. And I think my main criticism of it, which stops it being any higher, is that it's a bit on the nose. That it's like Data's a bit too much like Spock, Riker's a bit too much like Kirk.
Even Q is essentially Trelane.
But also, I like the central idea. I like the space station. I mean, DC Fontana was one of the writers, wasn't she? So. And also, I recommend, if you haven't watched it with the restored special effects and things that they've done on the Blu-ray, it is helped by that. The jellyfish at the end is improved. The strings don't quite look as much like strings doing this and sort of touching in a sort of like Thunderbird's hands. For me, because of what it begins, I think, which is not a hugely objective assessment, but yeah.
I'm looking at it, I think, more objectively in terms of I just don't think it's a good pilot. And I think I stuck with it because it was Star Trek. And actually most of the first season was sort of a struggle.
My number 9 is the Vulcan Hello from Discovery, and I've literally I'll read the bullet points I've got written down. Very dark like Picard, but felt promising at the time. It was exciting, it was epic, obvious movie scale. I liked Burnham and Doug Jones and Michelle Yeoh, although they didn't like what they did with Michelle Yeoh ultimately. The Klingons, weird. Don't know why they did that. It made them so inexpressive. Final positive point is I love the ship. I really like the ship design, the Ralph McQuarrie reference. And I do think if Brian Fuller had stayed on board and been allowed to progress it, I think a lot of this would make more sense. But I think because he was stepped away, because I rate Brian Fuller a lot, I think he's a really, really fabulous writer, and I love Hannibal and his work on the other Star Trek shows. So it's ultimately a missed opportunity. So Ian, what's your number 9?
Where No Man Has Gone Before. It's a good episode, but it's not a pilot. Again, if we're talking about the function of a pilot in this particular instance of launching a show, it's an episode. Just kind of like the last episode of Star Trek doesn't end the show. It's just an episode. That's why. It's not a bad episode. I love the actors in it. I think there's some good character stuff in there. But, you have to remember that the beginning of Star Trek was a little jumbled with the Doctor's issues and who was in which chair and all of that stuff.
Also, which aired first and all this sort of stuff.
Which aired first, right, exactly. So for me, again, not because of quality of the episode, not that it's the greatest episode, by the way, but just because it's the pilot, it didn't super serve its function as a pilot. So that's why it's a little down there for me. The rest are true pilots in my view.
I think you've convinced me. I should probably move where I placed it.
Well, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm looking at where it is on my list going, maybe I think you might be right about that. So Toby.
Well, we've discussed it. It's Remembrance Picard. There's some stuff in there that intrigued me. I think the whole what the relationship was between Daj and Soji and Data. I thought that was kind of like interesting. I liked the kind of the Borg cube and the fact that they were breaking it down and trying to learn from it and stuff like that. But there are things that stand against. I don't think Picard particularly feels like Picard. I mean, I know he's older, but I don't think they quite got his character right until season 3. But there was enough in there that I wanted to see the second episode, which is why it's ahead of Discovery. I stuck with Discovery, whereas Picard, I kind of wanted to see what happened.
Now we're agreed about that. So my number 8 is The Cage, which I would revise now. I mean, you've convinced me. I think I'll probably move When No Man Has Gone Before down my list. But this is the list. We'll go with the list we made. The Cage, because for all the reasons actually that it was flagged by the network unusually, which is it's interesting as hell. It's a fascinating idea, but it's very cold, very cerebral, and not spacey enough. Considering that the premise was wagon train to the stars, it feels very introspective and insular in its way, and that's no disservice to Jeffrey Hunter or even to the character of Pike, both of which are great and have subsequently been served well. But I also couldn't jettison my baggage with Spock, seeing a fully formed Spock, and then seeing this version of him, even including the hair and the makeup and Nimoy's performance, and I found the lovely Majel Barrett's number 1 to just be turgid and like, I don't know what she's doing.
There's no sense of togetherness in the crew.
No, and so there's a great idea. The overall premise of the Talosians, the makeup for that, because especially for them, for when it was made, was incredible. But I didn't care about anyone. That was a problem, and that's why I would always put, even if I reshuffled the order, I'd always put When No Man Has Gone Before above it, because I cared about the characters at that point. I really did, in a way that I never did in The Cage. So it feels like an intellectual exercise.
It's one of those things, though, as well, because you're familiar with the story from the Menagerie, which I don't know like you, but I saw the Menagerie before I saw The Cage.
No, I saw The Cage.
Right.
I saw them in
so I think the framing of the Menagerie makes that story a lot more interesting.
Oh, I agree with that, yeah. Well, that's what they're manipulating in Strange New Worlds as well. Perhaps maybe too much. I want to like it more, is one way I'd put it. But every time I've tried to go back and think, maybe I'm wrong. No.
Yeah, but maybe you're not, because ultimately the network decided not to back it, and they had to do a second pilot. I think that's a fair assessment.
So, Ian, you're number 8.
Second Contact.
Oh, okay.
Lower Decks. This is ranking all positive. I'm just putting them in order now.
Yeah.
Lower Decks is a very good pilot. I think it establishes the show, it establishes the character, it establishes that this is both your mom and dad's Star Trek and not your mom and dad's Star Trek. I think it sets the personality for the show quite wonderfully. The animation is an absolute hoot. It pops off the screen, from the voice cameos to the Easter eggs. It's all in there. If you love the show, you love the pilot. If you hate the show, you hate the pilot. I think it is perfect representation of the show as a whole.
I agree, yeah.
So, again, it's no knock on the show that I'm putting it at number 8, but there are just other pilots that I like better.
My number 8 is Prodigy, Lost and Found, as a 2-parter. Wasn't expecting much. Maybe that's the reason why I enjoyed it so much. There might be some recency bias in there as well, but I just thought it was a really good action-packed fun that I would like to see more of. I think
that's
the
true.
Theme tune is
that's very
fantastic,
true.
by Michael Giacchino. And then the rest of the music is, I'm going to say this wrong, but Nami Melamud?
Melamud.
Yeah. Who does Strange New Worlds.
I think she's Israeli. Yeah, Nami Melamud.
But I think the music is really good. I just wanted to highlight that.
Brilliant. Well, that actually is a nice link to my number 7, which is Strange New Worlds, which is, my first note is Hope is Rekindled. Basically, the main positive for Strange New Worlds was A, return to episodic, a really nice redesign of the Enterprise, although the thing I always struggle with is the flipped to dish. I like it to glow, but it's just me being picky. And it felt like Star Trek in a way that nothing had for a bit. Probably at the heart of that for me is Anson Mount as Pike, who just beams out, pun intended, as a genuine addition to the pantheon of captains. Now, we've seen him before, Jeffrey Hunter, yes, and also Greenwood in the Kelvin universe, but this is definitive. This feels like this is Captain Pike, and the series goes a long way on that for me. Yeah, there are permutations and why there's a little bit of inconsistency in this series in general, but again, talking about what makes a good pilot, the stall is set out in this. The dynamics, the differences between this and where we are in the original series, the proper introduction of people like Mbenga and his storyline is really rewarding. Chapel's good, and Jess Bush excels at that role. For some reason, never really resonated with Zoe Saldana's Uhura. She's fine, but I find Celia Rose Gooding to be just effervescent as Uhura, and genuinely one of the best recastings of any of those roles. It's just, it made me happy. It felt like Star Trek. It has a lot of work to do. I think to some degrees, I think the writing problem that continues to be an issue in modern Star Trek is it's all a bit too heart on sleeve. There's a very little subtext in a lot of the writing, and I think Strange New Worlds sort of makes the best asset of that. For instance, Pike is a very emotional captain, not like Kirk in the sense of bullish and running in where angels fear to tread, but in a sort of he's quite quick to emotion and to tear and to be sensitive.
I had this in the same position.
It's a good pilot,
and I think it's Anson Mount is I think he's just the standout. I haven't seen the rest of Strange New Worlds. I've only seen the pilot.
Your away missions are stacking up.
I know. It sort of feels like Star Trek, whereas I don't think Discovery or Picard felt like Star Trek.
Indeed.
Yes.
Or as much like Star Trek as we wanted it to feel.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing in terms of fandom and your expectations. And I mean, a lot of people make the argument that something as rich as a universe as rich as Star Trek can be many different things for many people. And in a lot of things, I accept that to some degree with Star Wars. But Star Trek comes from a particular place, from Roddenberry and his humanistic outlook, and I think the issues that we've already flagged with some of the other contemporary series is because they darken that too much, and it's too much a step away from that. The Strange New Worlds walks that line for me, but ultimately lands the right side of it.
And it looks beautiful, you have to say. It does. The production values are exceptional.
The opening title sequence is just great. I mean, it's for me, it's the best one. It reminds me of Voyager for obvious reasons, but it's just those beauty shots of that ship, just fabulous.
Well, if we're being honest, and this will be controversial, I have to be honest and just say I much prefer ship models to CG animation.
Oh no, I agree with that.
I look at the shows and I say that is some beautiful CGI. I don't look at the show and say, hey, that looks like a ship. The modern shows. It's not a criticism of the special effects. I'm not saying they're not great. I'm just saying nothing beats a camera and a model because it looks like a ship.
It's also too dark, isn't it? I would say as well. Everything's a bit too dark.
Yeah.
The coloration of the hulls are very grey. And you think about the motion picture, we all established last episode how in love I am with that. But essentially it's a pearlescent ship. And yes, it can fly through dark bits, but it itself is still quite a bright thing. You look at the Enterprise and Strange New Worlds, and it's quite grey. They can do things they never could, yes, undeniably, but I agree with you. Again, we talked about Deep Space Nine last episode, and it's the same thing. Knowing those sequences with those hundreds of ships, it's done with models, is just brilliant. And it works.
Makes me old school, but I still prefer it.
Your number 7, Ian.
I will say that I made a mistake ranking these based on my handwriting. So I would actually put Picard at 8 and Lower Decks at 7. So for the moment, I'm going to go back to Picard. I'm going to call it 8 and Lower Decks that we just did 7. Remembrance was good. Like many people, I just thought that it was too dark. I didn't like where they dropped Picard in his life story. I thought there were far more upbeat Star Trek exploring stories to tell than, like, more or less a redemption revenge story. I know we are on Paramount Plus and we're allowed to drop the F-bomb type of thing and all of that.
Yeah.
It can be used very effectively. And it was on Discovery a couple of times, actually. But it didn't feel right on Picard, to be honest. And I just was, the pilot represented my issues with the show, which was it just until season 3 felt like a little bit of a lost opportunity for me. I was, it's not that it's bad, it's that I was disappointed in it. Is the best way to put it.
I hate that conversation between the Admiral and Picard when he goes to visit Starfleet. That whole secret is just dreadful.
Yeah.
The fact that, when he walks in and they don't know who he is and all that.
So we come to my number 6, and it's Second Contact, Lower Decks. I echo everything you said, really, I think, Ian. I came to, a bit like Prodigy, I came to like it a lot more. Initially, I had a problem with it essentially being The Simpsons or Family Guy in space, and it says more about, for me, a lot of the then shows, because this is pre-Strange New Worlds, that were on, that it became to feel more like Star Trek than they did. And considering it's essentially a 50% parody, I always had a slight problem with that. But it did. But that's why I like the crossover episode with Lower Decks and with Strange New Worlds, because that sort of fit for me in terms of what they both represented. It's funny. It's exactly what you said. It's funny. It looks good. It pops. If you are a Star Trek fan, it's got jokes which are very knowing. I think, though, the reason it ultimately is higher than a lot of the others is it is the Next Generation Federation. It isn't what's going on that emo of Picard. It isn't the prequel emo of Discovery. It is the Next Generation era. It's bright, it's shining, it's the ship, it looks clean, and it's kind of banal, but that is important. That sort of sense of it not being, this isn't Star Wars. Everything shouldn't be dirty and grubby and used. There's an element, because that would be a negligent crew, and you don't have, and that's the point of Lower Decks, because they have all of those. So as much as I prefer a strong, serious live-action one, for a little while, Lower Decks kept me going on Star Trek. And everything you need to know, again, as Ian already said, everything you need to know is in that pilot. It's a very good pilot.
My number 6 is Encounter at Farpoint. A reasonable pilot for setting up the show and introducing the characters, but you can literally see the seams between the first half and the second half. It was absolutely Frankensteined together. In watching it as kind of like a 2-hour movie, it doesn't quite hang as a sole piece. It definitely is 2 halves of a disparate whole, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, and the way they brought it full circle at the end of Picard had some very interesting elements, and with the characters being deepened over X amount of decades of viewing time for the fans and our affection for the actors and the characters, I thought it was an A to Z trip, Picard, from the Next Generation, but I just thought not the world's greatest pilot, Next Generation, for the obvious reasons.
Tobes.
Again, possibly controversially, I've got Voyager's The Caretaker in this spot. I know. And this would have been a lot higher. I rewatched it last night. I remembered it being a lot better. Do you remember that it starts with a text scroll explaining the Maquis and Cardassian conflict? It's got some really good bits in it, but it really slows down and drags the whole Acampan thing where Kim and Torres are like, there are definitely, highlights. Tom Paris is a good character. The EMH is a standout. Janeway is a very good captain. I think I enjoyed her performance a lot. I like Robert Beltram, and so Chakotay, I like him from his previous work, so I was excited to see him in it. And I don't think his character is really particularly well done throughout the whole series, I don't think they really developed it. In fact, there are a couple of characters who sort of get dropped by the wayside a little bit. But I don't think the Kazon make a particularly good villain. I'm glad that they sort of replaced them with the Vidians pretty quickly. And yeah, I just found it a lot slower than I remembered it being quite pacey, but it was actually a lot slower than I remembered it. But there was a lot in there that I was interested in. I like the mystery of the caretaker starting on DS9 with a very fun cameo by Quark, who's like trying to tempt Kim into buying some worthless trinkets. So that there's stuff in there that I really like. I was genuinely surprised because I had this up higher on my list originally until I rewatched it.
I have got it higher, but before rewatching, literally my number 1 and number 3 swapped. So Caretaker is number 3 now. If you'd asked me cold, I would have said Caretaker was the best pilot because I loved it. But then equally, I saw it at Paige's bar with as committed an audience as possible, people dressed in uniform, drinking Romulan ale on a grainy VHS sent over from the States. In the same way that I have said previously that Deep Space Nine improved in my mind a lot and became the best series of Star Trek. Equally, that point, I welcomed Voyager because it was back on a ship and it was a little bit more dynamic. I too remember it being pacier, but fundamentally, the thing which keeps it high for me is trying not to think about where it goes. The promise of the Marquis crew, which was never really fulfilled.
It's resolved at the end of the episode, and I know there were a couple of episodes where it came back, but it's just resolved way too quickly. They should have.
I agree. I assumed it was going to come back. That's what I mean. So at that point, I loved the premise. Fundamentally, really liked the premise much more than I liked the idea of Deep Space Nine at that point.
We'll probably talk about this later, but like how Deep Space Nine, you had antagonism between characters. It's not done as well in Voyager.
We've covered my number 5, which is Encounter at Farpoint. We're not all huge fans, but what it led to gives it some real value, though. I think is probably the truth of it. So what about you, Ian?
My number 5 is Caretaker. Now, we did discuss that in quite a bit of detail. I will say that the pace conversation is a very interesting one. It is a little slower paced, but that was the mid-90s. Right now, we're so used to the bing, bang, zoom of current television, and that fast pace and no commercials and all of that it's a different world that we live in. It's kind of like comparing Caretaker to the original Star Trek pilot. It's a different world that we live in now, even though we're talking about the future. I forgive the pace because it was of its time, and it is interesting to go back and watch it. I will also, one of you gentlemen, friends of mine, mentioned Robert Beltran. I thought Robert Beltran pretty much had more to do in Caretaker than he did in the rest of the series. The character had some meat on it. It was interesting. They had no clue what to do with this character, even to the end of the show when they paired him off with 7 of 9 for 5 minutes. That was a lost opportunity as a character. I just don't think they knew where to go with the whole Native American angle. I don't think they knew where to go with him and Janeway. I don't think they knew what to do with that character being on board the ship, period. It just went nowhere. I mean, he had a couple of interesting episodes. That was a great setup that then dropped the ball with that particular character, in my mind. Kessa Neelix, that was not a great setup, and that never found its footing, ever, on the show. And I really liked Jennifer Lean in some of her episodes. I thought she brought a gentleness to the role that was interesting, and Neelix was another one. I love Ethan Phillips as an actor, but I think Neelix was a character, and Neelix and Kess was a relationship that they just didn't know how to make any use of it, and of him.
The interesting thing is, they kind of got it right in Fury.
Yeah.
Where she comes back.
Right.
It's sort of a weird. That almost made my shortlist for the last episode. But Fury is a really interesting because she's got the 2 different characters. She's got the innocent one, and then she's got the one who's just furious, seeking revenge. And that's why I think maybe they should have just left that a little bit longer and just focus more on the kind of conflict between the Marquis and Federation for the first episode. But I will say that what it does do is it sets up the premise of the show really well. So as a pilot, they're lost in space. They're trying to get home.
Right. This is why it's as high as it is on my list. It does set up the show in a very good way.
My spot is Second Contact, Lower Decks. I'm a big fan of the show. I really like it. I liked it from the off. That's my sense of humour, and I'm more than happy to kind of like just treat it as a separate entity. It's got all the Star Trek stuff in there, which I love, but I'm happy just to see it as an animated comedy, so it's never bothered me that they kind of, take the mickey a little bit. It's irreverent. I'm fine with that. I can just sort of separate it out. And although you were saying, it is connected to the TNG world, I'm honestly not all that bothered by that. I can just watch the characters as they are, and then, when they introduce the Pakleds as a major enemy, and all, I'm fine with it, So yeah, I just think it just got the tone right. I think it's a really good pilot. It sets up what this is going to be. That it's a very different show. I enjoyed it a lot.
Again, we've already discussed my number 4, which is Where No Man Has Gone Before, which we would move. I would move now, probably, but I think the only thing I haven't really said is that it's the Kirk of it. Let's be honest. What's the biggest difference? It's Kirk. It's Shatner. Pastiche to death and all this sort of thing, and he can, we know all the stories of ego, and he is the big difference. He's magnetic. He brings that character to life in a way others have already now tried or trying to do and not done as well.
He exudes charm, I think, and there's an instant rapport with him and Spock. I think that's straight away you get that.
It's that simple, really. As I said, you care about him in a way you just didn't about Jeffrey Hunter's Pike. So number 4, Ian, what's yours?
Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds. It was a pilot that introduced people, in many cases we already know, but don't know a lot about. It's filled in a lot of blanks over the course of the series. Jury is still out on season 3 as a whole. I think they're taking very big swings and in some cases fouling the ball off. But the premise of Strange New Worlds, I had a big issue. My thinking is we've gone to the well with the prequels enough. I give Discovery all the credit in the world for going 900 years into the future and rebooting the show. I thought that did wonders for the show, to be honest with you, and it made it more interesting. So I'm excited for Starfleet Academy because it will be a totally different world, but with some familiar faces. The next step is give me a show we have not seen at all with characters we have not seen at all and go explore. So Strange New Worlds, when it actually goes out there and explores Strange New Worlds, is very good. And I think the pilot does establish the premise, the characters, the chemistry between everybody, sets up things that we know are going to come in a very promising way. Oh, where is Corby going to come into the picture? Oh, where is, this going to come into the picture? A lot of that is extrapolated from the pilot. And it's not just fan service, it's excitement to see what's coming next. And I think that's there in that Strange New Worlds pilot. I was very impressed with it.
Yeah, again, you're very persuasive in the pilot debate, I have to say. You wanted to move mine around. Shocking. Tobes.
Mine's The Cage, which I think we've covered a lot. I think the surly, angry Pike just isn't quite right. I think there are some political stuff which doesn't quite work in current climate. Looking at it with modern eyes, but it was cerebral. But the elements are there. It's just that they haven't quite got the formula right yet.
Agreed. Well, so that means now we are covering similar ground because my number 3 is Caretaker. Love Paris, love Mulgrew, and I did like the marquee idea very much. And again, but as a pilot, that was held a lot of promise, which was never properly revisited. Periods of Voyage which were really great, but it was a bit inconsistent. Even when it's found its feet, I felt like it was pretty good out the gate, more so than the shows that had preceded it. But it didn't ever quite fly as high as the others. So, your number 3.
My number 3 is Emissary, Deep Space Nine. Again, this is a battle of riches that we're talking about now. I wasn't sure what to make of Deep Space Nine when it premiered. Nobody knew what was next. Is this, remember, this was being billed as the dark Star Trek. And guess what? It was. I loved that. that it was so different. It's what I want now. I want that next show that's going to be different and piss people off or excite people or both at the same time. Emissary did that for me. I thought there was the beautiful moment with, Cisco and his son on that little bridge type of thing. So you had some quiet moments, but you also had the conflict set up. Those characters, I think you can follow from A to Z on that show. All of them were developed based on the pilot. There wasn't, like I was saying about the Next Generation pilot, a lot of wasted or unused potential from the pilot to the rest of the show. I think a lot of the characters were established and carried forward from that pilot. And for me, it's a very strong number 3.
And it's got a great opening. The opening, the Battle of Wall 359 from
Unbelievable.
The other point of view is great.
How about action for a show that wasn't really an action series? That was also a good red herring for the show, I thought.
Yeah.
I also love the opening credit sequence, by the way. Just the wormhole and the floating station, the music.
Got a bit better when they added in the Defiant, though, didn't it?
It did. I'll give you that.
Got toes.
Where No Man Has Gone Before, although I think Ian probably has convinced me that it's not really a pilot, so maybe it should be lower down on the list. But yeah, I think everything I like by The Cage, they kind of fixed a lot of it in Where No Man Has Gone Before. Obviously the introduction of Kirk, I think, was the thing that kind of wins me over. I like the Gary Mitchell stuff. It's just a good swashbuckling. Actually, it was tonally just very different, and while not completely ejecting what Roddenberry wanted from the series. So
agreed. Right, so my number 2 is Broken Bow.
And mine.
There you go, Enterprise.
My number 2 also.
That's our first complete crossover. Well, my point is that this is much, much, much better than most of what followed. Which is to say, it did get better, Enterprise, undeniably, but I loved this pilot. Loved the ship. I've been waiting, and I'm thinking for a parallel, we've already talked about this a bit, which is that my 2 favourite shows used to air back-to-back on the same day on BBC 2, which was Star Trek Next Generation and Quantum Leap. So the fact that Bakula became a captain was like, oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. And I loved the opening on Earth. This is, in a weird way, this is what's made some of the prequel stuff recently feel a bit less fun, because this did a really elegant job of setting up Starfleet and the Federation and what it is, especially in the pilot. And I liked the more sort of utilitarian version of the starship and
the uniforms. Don't forget the uniforms utilitarian.
It's much more militaristic, really. You really actually feel like it's a branch of the armed forces.
Yeah, it's like a military version of NASA. Yeah,
I liked T'Pol and the playing off first contact element of that alliance between humans and Vulcans and the sort of distrust, and it sort of reminds me of some international relations of just between countries, in the sense that they're allied, but there are these rub points where not everyone is happy about it. Really like that. So it was. I just remember thinking this is it. This is great. This is good, and never for me quite picked up again until season 3, I think. Certainly when Manny Koto had more involvement.
There are definitely good episodes in between. I mentioned Azati Prime. I think that was season 2. That's a really good episode. I like a lot about it. Again, this was one that I revisited last night just to refamiliarise myself with it, because I haven't seen it for a while. I had forgotten about the whole bit with the Klingon running through the cornfield right at the very beginning. That had completely gone from my mind. I remembered the Vulcan objection to them going out into space, and I remembered the Suliban. I think the thing that possibly doesn't work is introducing the temporal Cold War right at the very beginning. Maybe they should have held that off a little bit. Keep the Suliban, but just keep their motives a little bit more in the background. The shower scene is possibly something that was a misstep. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. They were obviously just trying to sex it up a little bit by showing Jolene Blaylock in her pants and Connor Trenier. But I love the bit where they go down into the market to try and get information, and they have a shootout and there's misunderstandings and all that kind of stuff. I think is really well done. I have a slight problem. I don't think Scott Bakula is a great captain.
He wasn't actually what I thought he was going to be. It didn't feel like the slam dunk I was anticipating.
I think they just needed. He was just a little too soft for me. And although when he has moments when he has to be fierce, I don't think he quite pulls it off in the same way that I think any of the Janeway or Picard or Sisko, I think they would have pulled off those scenes better.
Oh, yeah.
I love Dr. Phlox. I think that he was instantly,
except for that smile thing.
I like that.
That went away very quickly. It was very time consuming and expensive.
I like the James Cromwell cameo, although it's very throwaway, and the whole introduction of the we're here to seek out new life and new civilizations, that's brought in. I think that's a really nice touch.
Yeah.
I like the fact that the things are there but they're not quite right. So it's Captain Starlog and it's phase pistols, and the phase pistols only have 2 settings, which is stun and kill. Nothing in between. It's little things like that. The introduction of the transporter as well. I like the fact that the ship can only go warp 4.5. All those kind of like little things are great. Paul being a vegetarian, disliking Porthos because she can smell him. Because Vulcans have got heightened nasal sense.
It's full of great little details. I mean, and that's the thing. I was contemplating what was different between this prequel and say something like Discovery, and I think there is there is something profoundly different about it. And I think, Ian, you've hit on it already, which is by the time when you're in Discovery and you're in the past, you're kind of like, well, I kind of want to go ahead. I want to move forward. I don't want to be hanging around in something which we sort of already had. But also there's that sense of careful plotting of these elements, which I think Discovery felt a bit fast and loose with, if you know what I mean. Compared, in Enterprise, it was very meticulous and careful, sometimes to its own detriment, perhaps. And that's certainly that you can feel the temporal Cold War is sort of an envelope that they're kind of trapped with, finding their feet, weren't they, when they were unfortunately cancelled? I would love to have seen that.
I thought it nailed a lot. If I'm not mistaken, it was shot in high def. That made a huge difference. The opening sequence was shot on location. I thought they really took advantage of location stuff. Beautiful looking episode. Great rousing music for much of it. Very Star Trekky. It was also wonderfully low tech. I liked seeing like you were starting to say, pistol instead of phaser. It was low tech to the degree that it was setting the stage for a lot of things that were going to come. But not just the characters and not just the ethos and the ethics and the morals of the Star Trek universe, but the minutia as well, which I thought was really cool. To your point, Tobe, about Warp 4, that stuff was really cool. You gotta start somewhere, right? And so I thought the pilot, and again, I'm with you both, that the subsequent show didn't do this as well as we all hoped it would, but the pilot really gave us the characters, the world, early Star Trek. It was the prequel at the right time. Everything else that's prequels, well, we saw a lot of it in Enterprise. Do we need to see it again? I think Strange New Worlds is doing the prequel thing really well in many instances, but I think that Enterprise had it more right, for lack of a well-spoken sentence. I think they nailed it on the head, just a little better in the pilot. Yeah, it's a terrific pilot. And
it's got some creepy scenes in it as well. The scene where the Suliban invade the ship and it's all pitch black and they're kind of like becoming invisible, and then, turning up behind people. It's actually really creepy, which obviously I appreciate as a horror fan.
And the ratings were there for that pilot. If I remember correctly, it was over 10 million people watched that episode.
12.5.
If I remember correctly, it had great reviews. Early stages of the internet, the fans were eating it up. It was set to be a great show based on a great pilot. And it was a good show that got much better near the very end. We all know where it ranks in our show list as a whole. But as a pilot, man, not much better than that one.
I think it was one of the best single episodes they made in their run, Berman's run. It's that good. Not just as a pilot. It's just they found it hard to get back to that with this format. Which brings us round to my number one, which again,
and mine, because we're obviously agreed on this.
Yeah, which is Emissary for Deep Space Nine. And again, this literally Broken Bow stayed where it is. Number 2 was when I first started the list, but Caretaker and Emissary swapped for me. I hadn't watched Emissary in a long time. It was so impressive. The things which bothered me at the time, like Sisko's hot feet and on the sand going, ow! So some performance choices of Avery Brooks early, I admit I struggled with. I think, as he was saying, a bit Marmitey initially, but now, absolutely unabashed. It was, the ideas were so good. Sort of trying to tackle religion in a very Roddenberry-esque Star Trek way, and acknowledging that that's a belief system is a prism through which people see objectively different ways of different truths. That was really profound straight away, and turned a race like the Bajorans into this incredibly detailed, complex, one of the most rounded, thought-out races in all of Star Trek. And again, that was very clear right at the beginning. And just the idea of the wormhole station. And also, you have to just acknowledge the promenade, the set. Which, like, there was nothing else like that in Star Trek. It was the biggest standing set, wasn't it? I think
Quark's Bar and the bridge and everything. It's really.
Did you guys ever get to visit those sets?
I went to Vegas, the Hilton, when I think they had some of them there, right? But it wasn't. I'm not sure if they were recreations or whether they're the actual sets, but
it was an unbelievable set to visit, the Deep Space Nine set. It was literally 2 levels. You had the brig was in one spot. A lot of stuff was right on top of each other. When I used to go, all of us, especially you two as editors, the photos from Deep Space Nine were a colossal pain in the butt because everything was so dark. Those sets were dark and you couldn't use a flash. And a lot of the time they were shooting the actors while they were working. So the camera was in a box that absorbed the sound. You couldn't use a flash, and there was no natural light to work with. So as dark as the series was thematically, it was also that dark on the set. And it was unbelievable sets.
To that point, the world building is fantastic. And I think what we were saying about disparate characters being forced together.
Yeah.
I don't think it was done any better than in Deep Space Nine. There's so much conflict. I'm a big fan of Gul Dukat and Mark Alamo. I think he is a brilliant antagonist. I like the fact that the Federation and the Bajorans, it's a really uneasy alliance. The fact that you've got the Ferengi on there. The Ferengi were irritating until this point.
Oh, yeah.
Did not like them.
It's Armin.
Yeah.
Armin alone basically made that species work.
There's the mystery of Renee's character. I think that's fantastic. There's just so much in there that I think is great.
No, absolutely, completely agree. And just Dax as well. So that means we know what Ian's number 1 is.
Sure. My number 1 is The Cage. I thought it was fascinating. No pun intended. I thought interesting performances. I loved the aliens. I loved the dilemma. Now, that what's really interesting for people who like nostalgia and other things is there was a Twilight Zone episode that was basically the same story. People are alike all over. Starring Susan Oliver, interestingly enough. So very much the same story in many ways. At the top of this, I was talking about how, best is different from most popular, or, however else you want to break that down, most important. This is the one that breaks that mold a little bit for me, because I saw this at one of my early conventions where Roddenberry was walking around with a black and white print of it, and then he found the color version of it. But so he introduced the pilot at one of my first Star Trek conventions. For me, it holds that little extra distinction that sets it apart from everything else for me. I think there's a lot of formative Star Trek in it that I find interesting. I think it serves as a pilot in a better way than what ended up being the pilot. I love the way it was cut into the menagerie, actually. I agree with you. I think it was Tobe who said it, that it works much better within another episode than as an episode itself. No question. But I did think as a standalone, it was a cool episode. I thought it was cool television. I thought it was cool Star Trek. And if there's one episode of any of the shows across all of the years that has to, set things up, I thought that was the table setter. It really was for me. I know it's not a popular choice. I was not sitting there looking to say, ooh, let me be different. You know what I mean? It's just, if you said to me, what's the seminal episode that you're going to go back and watch of all 12 pilots, it would be that. And honestly, if we were talking about the films, I would go with Star Trek 2009, doing a really good job of setting up the universe. But we're talking television pilots here, and obviously, the 2009 movie isn't a pilot, but it did relaunch the franchise in a way, and I thought that did a very good job. But anyway, The Cage for me, my friends.
So next episode is going to be our ranking of the finales. I've chosen a cerebral favourite Star Trek in the Motion Picture. Ian has chosen a cerebral pilot in the cage. What's going to be the finale that Toby picks it slightly that we can go, oh no! But that's for another time. That's for next episode. So for now, I say thank you to Ian and Toby. And I've been thinking about this after being told I sucked last time. I will say to the listeners, see you next episode for another journey beyond the final frontier.
Ooh. And in the meantime, peace, love, and logic.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Final Frontier, a Star Trek podcast with Rich Matthews, Ian Spelling and Toby Weidmann. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us on beyondFFpod@gmail.com or check us out on social media. You can even join our Patreon at BFFBeyondTheFinalFrontier. Huge thanks go out to Alex Weidmann for the brilliant original music. Please search Alex Weidmann Composer on YouTube to hear the full fantastic theme and more. Also thanks goes to award-winning voiceover artist Cissy Jones for our excellent opening monologue. Find out more about her incredible work at cissyjones.com. And of course, last but not least, our brilliant artwork comes from Russell Seal. Discover more of his work on behance.net/Russell Seal. Thanks again and see you next episode, Beyond the Final Frontier.